Hey, my name is Shirley. I am a second-year medical school student, and in this video I'll be going over the highs and lows of my first year, as well as going over the progress I've made on my goals that I set. So definitely understood what they meant regarding the metaphor of the fire hydrant, where there's a ton of info that you have to know, and it's less so the difficulty of the information and more so the quantity and the sheer amount of information that you need to be familiar with. And when I first started medical school, I really struggled my first couple months, and then later on I realized that I don't need to know every single detail, and that actually helped me a lot. Some of my professor's slides went into a lot of detail because obviously they're very well versed in their field and their specialty, and looking at external resources such as Boards and Beyond, Pathoma, Sketchy, etc. helped because they help boil down the information to what would be essential to know, and they help put things in bigger pictures. So I would look at external resources and pair that along with my professor's slides to get a good mix of the bigger picture as well as specific details that I would need to be familiar with. It also helped to know that I didn't need to be an expert just because I finished one blog. A lot of information from past blogs actually get brought up again in future blogs. For example, many of the things that I learned in the kidney system or the renal system came up again when we learned about cardiology because they're so interconnected. So having that connection and realizing that I don't need to know everything right now, I'll be reviewing that information as the years go on, and especially during rotations when I'm able to apply that information more, and knowing that I don't have to know everything at this moment helps with the stress. I think one of my biggest struggles, especially with the pandemic, was learning how to manage my time. So I was actually fairly good at managing my time before med school because I was working full-time, working part-time, retaking classes, and studying for the MCAT all at the same time. And my schedule was very much coordinated, and every hour kind of had something scheduled. Versus now, I have class, and then because of the pandemic, I didn't hang out with friends as much, so I had more free time, quote unquote, but it wasn't the same as having that 2-hour gap where I was going to study. It was more so when I had free time, I would study. So that was less structured and made it a little more difficult to schedule my time, but eventually I got the hang of it. It just wasn't something I was used to right off the bat. So in college, I would mainly look at my professor's slides and kind of study based on that for the final exams. Whereas in medical school, as I've said, I use a lot of external resources and I pair that along with my professor's slides, so they kind of go hand in hand. And then I also do a lot more practice questions. So in college, especially for certain classes like psychology or biology, I would just review the slides and that would be enough to do okay on the final exam. Whereas in medical school, because of the sheer amount of information, there's a lot of memorization that needs to take place, and I also need to be able to put all the information I've learned. Practice questions come into hand because they're able to help me think about how all this information I know kind of comes into play. In college, I was a huge fan of Quizlet, and then in medical school, Anki is a very popular flashcard app, and there are many YouTube tutorials out there on that. And I don't use it all the time, but it is helpful for when I need to memorize certain details. I don't think it's all that helpful in terms of learning how to critically think, because every card tests you on one specific detail and you don't really look at the bigger picture as much, so that's where practice questions come into play. So I do a lot of Anki for memorizing and then practice questions for actually critically thinking, and then I use first aid a lot for kind of getting a bigger picture of everything and just to help me organize all the information. So before med school started, I actually set up 5 goals that I'd like to accomplish by the time I graduate. The first of which was to do well in medical school and beyond. So academically speaking, I have passed all my classes. In terms of the raw score that I've gotten after the curve for each block, I haven't been doing super well or well above the average, but I have passed all my classes, and since my school is pass no pass, that's all that really matters. So academically speaking, I think I'm doing okay. Another part of that goal was doing well enough where I would be able to help my fellow classmates should they have questions regarding the material. And I have started a Google Drive for my class as well as for classes below me so that we can collaborate and share information and materials and just help each other out. In terms of extracurriculars, I am an officer for various student organizations on campus. I am my school's American Medical Association alternate delegate. I'm also a Spanish tutor for my school. I have been volunteering for Reading Partners, which is a program that helps elementary school students improve their literacy and reading comprehension. and that's something that has been stopped over the summer, but I plan to continue that in my second year of medical school. I'm also currently part of 3 research projects, so in terms of extracurriculars, I think I'm doing fine on that as well. And then lastly, the beyond part was kind of knowing enough about medicine that I can apply the skills outside of just what I learned in class. And I think that has been a bit of a challenge, especially because of the pandemic, because many of the skills, such as clinical skills, talking to patients, doing physical exams on patients, having access to labs and cadavers has been impacted by the pandemic because we were all online. So that has been a bit difficult, and I don't feel very comfortable with performing a physical exam. Thankfully this year we are back in person, so that will hopefully get better. But that is something that will be a bit of a challenge for now. However, in regards to just clinical information that I've been taught in class, I've had about 2 instances where I actually recognize something that I learned that friends have brought up. For example, my best friend and I were watching a movie called The Sky is Pink, and in the movie there is a case of busulfan-induced pulmonary fibrosis, and busulfan is a chemotherapy drug that I learned about in my pulmonology block. So that was really cool to recognize that and know what the movie was talking about. And another instance was when a friend who's been getting into golf told me about pain that he's been feeling near his elbow region, and I recognized that as medial epicondylitis, otherwise known as golfer's elbow. So those were 2 instances where I was like, wow, I'm actually learning information that I'm applying to, not necessarily to patients obviously because I haven't seen any patients, but just to my daily interactions, and that's been pretty cool. My next goal was to take care of my health, be that physical, mental, or social. So in terms of my physical health, I did jog around my neighborhood a couple times a week generally, and then for about a month I did push-ups every day, which I did film a video on, and I also did some strength training with just free weights. And then I also joined my friends for group workouts, so someone would share their screen with a YouTube video and we would just all follow along and kind of do some aerobic / calisthenics exercises. In terms of mental health, I definitely struggled a lot during the first couple months adjusting. I failed my first block in terms of the final exam. Thankfully the curve did save me and I passed overall, but that was definitely very stressful, and there were often times when I felt all I was doing was studying. In terms of free time, if I wasn't studying, then I felt kind of guilty for not studying, and that got better as the year progressed and I learned how to study better as well as just manage my time. But the first few months were definitely quite challenging. And then in terms of imposter syndrome, I got into a medical school with a fairly low GPA of about 3.1 to 3.3 depending on how you calculate it. So I was expecting to feel some sort of, I don't necessarily belong here, I'm not smart enough, but I actually don't feel that way. And I think part of it is because so long as I put in the effort, I feel that I'm not too far behind my peers and I made it, right? Like they chose me for a reason. So reminding myself of that helps. So my next goal was to become more informed about culture, politics, and public health. So at my medical school, we actually have a course titled Colloquium, where we learn about these topics. And through that, as well as my own efforts through looking at forums, watching YouTube videos, reading books, etc. And I definitely don't have a ton of knowledge on these topics, but I have become more familiar with them. I'm more aware of my implicit biases and more aware of the systemic issues that this country faces, especially in regards to health inequities. This is definitely going to be a lifelong process of learning and being open and willing to talk about these issues, as well as doing my part to try to help combat them. My next goal was to become fluent in Spanish and Mandarin. So I'm currently a Spanish tutor for my medical school, and I feel that's helped me a lot because when I prepare for the classes, I'm reviewing the material myself, and then when I answer questions that my students have, that helps me kind of explain the process of the grammar or conjugation, etc. I've also been language exchanging with various people from Latin American countries, Mexico, Peru, Argentina, Colombia, etc. And currently, the language exchange partner that I talk to most is a medical student from Ecuador, and it's been cool learning about the cultural differences, the differences in medical school, in our healthcare systems, etc. And I just feel more well-versed in Spanish in general and feel comfortable talking about a wide variety of subjects with a native speaker. In terms of Mandarin, I didn't do much studying over the school year because I was busy with med school as well as learning Spanish. It's kind of hard learning 2 languages at the same time when they're so vastly different. But over the summer, I have been practicing writing, and I'm currently using Anki for memorizing characters, and I have about 700 plus cards that I am fairly familiar with. And I recently purchased a book to help me learn even more characters, and hopefully improve my writing and speaking even more. And I've also been language exchanging with a native Chinese speaker, so I've overall been improving my Mandarin as well. And then lastly, my goal was to continue YouTube, and although I don't post as often as I maybe should, but I'm pretty happy with the progress that I have made because I think YouTube is something I definitely enjoy, but it's not a priority compared to school, compared to learning languages, my extracurriculars, etc. So it's definitely something that I don't dedicate a lot of time to. But it's been nice because the comments that I've been receiving from all of you have been really supportive, and I'm glad that I've been able to answer many of your questions, help out with personal statements, etc. And then as of now, I have about 500 subscribers or so. And it's been nice because I've been able to respond to every single comment, every single email, and answer every single question that I've received, because I know that I definitely had a lot of doubts. And I was very grateful for the individuals that were able to mentor me, to help me out, to let me shadow, etc. And I hope that even in the future, I'll be able to help out other people that are on different parts of the medical journey. Alright, so that's it for this video. I will see you another Sunday. Until then, I surely hope that you take care of your health.